Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Today I have an episode for you about red flags in relationships, how to recognize them, how to turn them towards green flags, how to recognize your own red flags, and why we start out from a disparate place in relationships in this society, which sounds like a super weighty topic, and it kind of is. My friend Jacob, who is just the biggest sport in the world, willing to talk about all kinds of deep and weighty subjects with me, Jacob Fluharty is joining me again today. Hey, Jacob, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I am well. I just got back from grounding in the trees, and I'm sure that people are like genuinely afraid of me at the park at this point because I feed the crows every single time. And so I walk into the park and the crows start circling and they follow me the entire way. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure that's a really comforting thing. Oh, she comes with of the spirit messengers. So let's get talking about red flags. But first, we need to talk about the disparity in how, particularly if you identify as a woman or you identify as a man, in our society and in most societies, we are not taught to value relationships at the same level. That's part of the gender programming that we're always trying to overcome, where we have confused biological function with determining so much about a person's emotional structure and what they're capable of. And one of the reasons we want to kind of set this aside is to free people from toxic relationship dynamics that include when you live in a society that has programmed men to take romantic love far less seriously than women do, then we are starting out at an uneven place. So, in particular, women or the empathic partner in a relationship, the person who is more about the feelings, have to be very, very conscious of red flags going forward because we're more likely to ignore them because we have been programmed or trained or taught to expect through our media and through our societal structure to put more importance on relationships than they can usually bear. And so women really, really, really want to find their person. And men, this is generalizations, and it means it won't cover everybody, but generalizations never do. Women value relationships and romantic love and the idea of finding their person far more than the average man does. And so we need to be very aware of that disparity and compensate for it. So, Jacob, the other part we need to do is recognize our own red flags because we have them. If you are dealing with anxiety disorders or depression or emotional regulation issues, the first red flags you have to address in yourself are the ways in which your coping mechanisms need a fine tuning, and that's all it is. It's not saying you're too broken to have relationships. Rather, be aware of your vulnerabilities as you approach relationships so that you can have better relationships so that everybody ends up happy. So, Jacob, in your experience, what red flags have you encountered in your early relationships that you just breezed past? Because we all do it.
Yeah, well, to be completely frank, I'm usually one that's carrying the red flags.
Me
So
too.
there's that. But for me, I guess like the things that I don't notice are because I guess my desire to like be taken care of or be loved or whatever was so strong that I walked by a lot of like red flags, quote unquote, about like about being controlled almost, like how I didn't really have like a lot of say in what I was allowed, quote unquote, allowed to do, or if I was given like that leeway, the choices that I made were not easily accepted, or I was like heavily judged for the way that I was doing X, Y, or Z. And I think that's my big one is getting into relationships with people who either are a little bit more domineering and try to like change my personality, or maybe like try to change my red flags and they overcompensate. I don't know.
That makes perfect sense for because we both know each other's backstories really well. Jacob and I know each other fairly well at this point, and so like we know what we're referring to when it's like, hey, you know about that thing. But to kind of break it down, like you were looking for the love, safety, and acceptance, protection, and validation of somebody who would then also properly provide for your needs because it was a basic human need that was not fulfilled in your childhood experience. As usual, I'm going to cover the ground of this is not about blaming nor shaming your parents. It's just a reality of the experience that you had and there were reasons for it. Your parents also were essentially, they were trying to do something before they were able to, and so they were not working from the healthiest structure either. My biggest tendency towards ignoring red flags, and like you, not so much anymore, but particularly in like, whenever I'm referring to my 20s, which was my decade of dealing with how toxic everything I had learned really was, and learning to confront the ways in which it's like, I need to learn new things because I was practically raised by savages in terms of how workable my relationship skills were, because I grew up with people who had none. They just absolutely had none. My father was almost entirely helpless in the face of anything practical. And so my grandmother had always taken care of him at an adult age at a level that was just far too extreme. The man needed more independence. And so he was prone to unhealthy relationships. But the ones that I always ignored, and I had to learn from it, is that when people would tell me something about themselves, if it indicated that they were not a particularly good person in this, at my heart of hearts, I believe all people are goods thing that I carried around my whole life. And now I understand that I still believe that, but we are constructed of our choices, and some people will simply not choose that path, and no amount of giving them the benefit of the doubt will put them on the path that you're on if you are choosing your higher self. And so I literally ignored, we've talked about how an ex-partner of mine literally told me he hated people during a first like lunchtime that we had together. And I felt sorry for him rather than saying that's a giant red flag. He also told me that he suspected when he was a teenager that he was a sociopath. And I completely breezed past that one going, oh, he's probably just an angry adolescent. So that was my big thing, is I would talk myself out of and into giving out of the red flag and into giving someone the benefit of the doubt perpetually, in part because I had so much unhealed damage of my own that I knew I was also like sporting. I was throwing off red flags like I was a referee at a weird relationship tournament. But I have since resolved those. And now going forward, of course, I would know not to ignore any of them. Hey, listen, before I like walk into this story, I need to cover something. I contacted this client to make sure it was okay to tell this story, because this was the inspiration for this particular topic. A client of mine who I've read for kind of a while, every time I had any kind of relationship reading for her, it would be a case of money cards coming out and like, whatever you do, don't mix your money with this person. Don't give them any money. It's a big trigger for you. I don't know why. And finally, the last time I read for her, she told me why. Because it was there in cards again when she had met a very promising partner. And I told her, hey, it's still here. It's be careful about this. And she told me she had fallen for a dating site scam almost a decade ago. It was less than that, but it was almost a decade ago, in which this is why we have to be so cognizant of red flags, is that there is an entire, I kind of want to call them subspecies, but they're humans. They're just doing the wrong thing, of people who will prey on people who do not have good boundaries, which is what really not recognizing red flags is about, is that you don't have particularly good boundaries. So anyway, this person dated her for 3 months, put in 3 months of work on the scam that he was trying to pull off. And at the 3-month mark, there was a reason. He either used only debit cards or only worked with cash. He found something he wanted to buy for her, he told her. So could he have her credit card number, and he would pay her back because the site only took credit cards. They had been together for 90 days, and she's a good and trusting person. We see the world as we are. She would never scam somebody. She gave him the number. He proceeded to jack her balance so high that she could not pay it back, and actually had to declare a form of bankruptcy because the bank would not forgive it as theft, because she had actually given him the number. Even though he got it from her by lying to her, they still couldn't forgive the debt on it. And so this is why we have to be very, very cognizant of red flags in the dating app world. Be careful when somebody tells you who they are. Flippin' believe them. We can't convert somebody to being a good person. That was my big problem. And we can't envision who we wish somebody was to have a relationship with them. And I see that over and over again. And what have you seen? Because you, of course, you deal with different communities as well, and red flags exist in all types of relationship. What are the red flags that you see people overlooking?
I tell people almost verbatim what you just said, but I say, like, when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. Because, as speaking for me personally, I'm someone who's really, really good with language. So, I think that's what kept my ex-husband around for so long, was I was really good at talking myself out of that doghouse, right? But my actions were never changing. So it was like, at a certain point, I'm just going to call myself out. Like he should have seen that red flag being repeated in my actions, and kind of walked away from it. There was something else you said that triggered something. I can't remember what it was now, um, but yeah, that's kind of like where I go with it is like people are going to slip. No one's perfect at keeping that facade, and they're going to slip them. They're going to have cracks, and you can't just kind of brush those aside, right? I think that something that you said might have been my ex's mentality as well, is like not maybe like see me as like a fixer upper, right? Like I had potential, like I had a beautiful outside, right? But the inside was a little bit needed some TLC, and he thought that he was the handyman for the job. But that's not work that an external person can do, right? Like that's only going to come
Oh
from
yeah,
me.
it's called
So
being a rescuer. It's called being a
yeah,
rescuer. And like,
and
did
he
my
definitely
ex do
was.
that with me? 100%. Thought, here's this great person. If I fix all of her stuff, she can serve my needs.
Right, exactly, and it worked for a little bit. Don't get me wrong, but then once I started getting older, and then like I was trying to do my own work, and then was doing my own work, and then things started to change for me internally. That's when the differences started coming out, and then we realized, hey, like maybe this, who I became was not who he envisioned me becoming, but it's who I needed to become. And then that's when that, things started to fall, quote unquote, fall apart. I hate to use it so negatively because I don't see it as like this negative experience, but
Well, no, and please remember, all of your past relationships, whoever you are, they contain the building blocks for your new and healthy foundation. If you're willing to look at what you also did. Now, what the red flags my ex was ignoring in me was, like many codependent people, I went from one relationship to another. I did not remain single. And like I've
yeah,
been single for a good long time now, so it's no longer an issue of mine. And I used to always be a runner as well. I have a very deep fear of, like, getting very close to people. And so I'm usually in the runner position where, like, I have ghosted people in my past. Do I do it any
mhm,
longer? No, I don't. You can actually heal and grow from things. But here's what happened is, weirdly enough, my ex was right. If you fixed all my stuff, I could be a great human being. Well, I fixed all my stuff, and then I looked at our relationship and I was like, this is a dreadful relationship.
right, yeah. See,
Absolutely need
sometimes
to leave it. Like
they're
there,
not ready for that outcome, right? Like and
like,
that basically the same thing, right? Like now, granted, we didn't have a terrible relationship, but it definitely was not one that needed to continue. Like, the adults that we became were not, the kids that we were when we met. So it's like,
oh, that's a giant red flag that we can participate in, which is valuing the idea of permanence in a relationship over quality.
right. Yeah. And so I think like coming from like being a homosexual, I think gives me a different perspective just because like monogamy, and especially not lifelong monogamy, is not really an idea that it is. I'm not, can't speak for the whole community, obviously, and I'm not trying to, but I'm just saying like in the people that interact with, like this idea of like one person for the rest of your life is not a very like widespread, or I don't know. It seems like a very heteronormative idea that kind of is going away. And for most of us younger, well, I'm going to consider myself a younger gay person
You
for
are you
this
are
the
younger.
topic of this conversation. But yeah, it's like, of course, the guys are getting married and they still want that lifelong commitment and blah blah blah. But I don't see it being, especially with the younger people younger than me, like the generation after me, definitely are not looking for lifelong partners, right? In the same way that like my parents were, maybe my friend group, my straight colleagues are. I don't know. It seems like that mindset is different.
Well, and there's a reason. The idea of permanence in a lifelong partner comes from a traditional structure, and there's a reason that the till death do you part is, and in most, organized religion, it is the woman. All these things were written by men, so go figure. It's always the woman's fault, and the woman's subservient to the man. In most organized religions. Now, I am never mocking faith, but religion is a man-made structure that is put into place largely to control people and to amass
Mhm.
powers. And that is really what it is. And you can follow the doctrine of anything, but you don't need to follow it through the religion. Like, follow the teachings, but understand the power structure might be up to something that has to do with
Mhm.
keeping power. And traditional relationships, which is the heteronormative or the cisgender relationships, and I am cisgender, um, really value the idea of a lifelong partnership, because once you're in something, it means that there is no standard for your treatment if you believe that it is supposed to be lifelong. So recognize that as something that don't overinvest in it, and you will already be plucking a red flag and throwing it away. Don't
Mhm.
really value the idea of permanence over connection, over the quality of
Mhm.
the connection. So I'm going to go back to the story I told just a moment ago about my poor client who is just, she's such a wonderful human being. She's a social worker. She works with disadvantaged and disabled people, and she owned her own home. And the reason that I'm going into this, and she still does, by the way, she did not lose her home in that experience. Please
Good, good.
understand that when you are going forward on dating apps and you are interacting with people that are, they're putting forward the image that they wish you to see, there is a chance that they have looked into who you are if they can get any information about that, because that's why she was targeted. She
Mhm.
was targeted as somebody who had, who was going to have this amount of money to be taken from her. And it was, I give her a lot of credit for continuing, because I think if that was me, I'd be like, get me to a nunnery because I'm out of this dating pool. But
Right.
she is a very brave and forgiving person and has continued and has fallen in love and takes that risk and has the joy because of it. But you need to be aware when you are going forward and you are meeting new people that there is literally no way, there is no spiritual nor cosmic connection that will stand in for the time it takes to know somebody. Now, every now and then people will meet. It's cosmic, it's kismet. That will endure, but please have rules around how much you trust somebody by the time in. So she went at
Mhm.
90 days. I like there's hardly a human being that I know that I would give my credit card number to, period. And but at 90 days, she felt she could trust this person enough. The bare minimum is 6 months. And here is why the cracks start to show in anybody who is putting on a front. It's called the honeymoon phase. Get past the 6 month stage before you begin investing in the idea of a long term future, and you do so tentatively. And one of the things I will always say is the way to avoid red flags is to have rules around how, and don't like lose your head to love. In the head and heart battle, if you let your heart lead, it's going to get smushed. You have to have your logic and reason in place as well. Bare minimum 6 months to really feel like you know somebody. You need to have one major disagreement, and you also need to have something that involves money, a purchase or something where you see how somebody interacts with money to help you be safe. As you go forward with people you have not met, it's a very good idea to have friends that you will text so they know what your location is. If you know the person's, always meet somebody new in public for the first time. Do not go to a second location in their car. Always drive yourself. If this all sounds paranoid, listen, for the good people, it just means that you will be establishing trust at a healthy level, and it will weed out the people who are out to get you. And there are people who are out to get you from both sides. Because I'm talking about a guy who took advantage of a woman, but it can go the other way as well. Is it as common? No, it's not. But we all need to be self protective. And a red flag that you can throw off is being too trusting. And I was too trusting. Now, I paid for that very, very dearly, and my trust was absolutely violated on absolutely every known level over the course of a 20-year relationship. In fact, it was so bad at the end. Here's how I finally started to realize it's like, okay, who this person thinks says they are and pretends to be is not the same thing as who they are.
Mhm.
Towards the very, very end, I had to go on a business trip, or I chose to because he was going to an area that I liked that we had been in before. And he had been speaking very highly of a female coworker. Everybody knows where this is going as soon as I start it. He had been speaking very highly of a female coworker. She was going to be on that trip as well. When I met her, she looked exactly like me. She was Latina, but she looked exactly like me. And she was, I think, 18 years younger than I was. But she also
Ooh.
had the same backstory where she was being abused by somebody and she was a single mom. And it was like the universe standing there waving a red flag the size of the type that you fly over an effing car dealership going, do you see it yet? It's like, yeah, no, I'm not so dumb. I see it. Nothing against that woman. She was very sweet. God knows what he was telling her. But she couldn't even make eye
Right.
contact with me at first. So that one was so obvious that, and then like we had to go on a vacation after that. The entire time he acted like he hated me. I think because she likely called whatever was going on off after that. So that's where red flag ignoring can get you. Is that sooner or later the red flag will increase until you can make a damn tent out of it. It is
Mhm.
important to cut something off before it can take true root in your life to protect yourself. But you also have to try and approach the world with an open heart. So, how do you strike that balance? By
Hmm.
having these firm rules and routines and rituals around how you extend your trust appropriately. And you also, again, need to look at your own red flags. Have you been single for a full year as an adult? Because it actually is a good litmus test for whether or not you are overvaluing relationships. We do need to be able to function independently to have truly healthy relationships, as you discovered. How did that come into play in your marriage, by the way?
How did it come into play in my marriage?
Yeah, because we've talked a lot about how there was a part of you that just was looking, understandably, looking for somebody to protect and take care of you.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's definitely how our relationship started. I guess like because he was much more like but I don't want to use the word put together because that implies that I wasn't. But like he had plans and he was good at doing adult things, and I was just like having fun all the time. That was very appealing to me because obviously I wasn't willing to get my act together at all. Um, but so yeah, I mean that was definitely the basis of our relationship. Probably kept us going for so long. But I don't know, like I said, I carried the red flags on that one because, like, well, granted, like he still had that like fixer upper mentality that wasn't super healthy, but no, a lot of it was just like I needed someone to help take care of me because I wasn't able to do it myself.
Yeah. And that's really what you need to, if you want to have a really good relationship in an exterior capacity, first form a really good relationship with yourself. And that very painful experience that happened in 2018 that I've been referring to, that
Mm.
very painful experience where it was shoved right in my face what I had been ignoring. I had trusted him far, far too much over the course of a long period of time, and I paid for it. And by the way, everybody around us very clearly understood something that, like, it's like I was walking into face first. And they treated me with a contempt that was very, like, it was startling to me because, like, I had been
Really?
apparently that blind to it. Like, they really just treated me almost like I was a little loyal dog that it's like, "Can you believe how dumb this woman is?" And, like, it's absolutely okay, and I lived and I learned good lessons from it, and as I said, I actually have nothing against that poor woman. She seemed like a delightful person who, of course, did not know her own worth, and I hope
Mm.
good things happened for her, and whatever occurred between them, like, I completely forgive that towards her. It's not a problem. It helped me learn things. But the place to start when you are trying to make sure that you do not ignore red flags going forward is to take an honest accounting of your past relationships to see the mistakes that you made. And in that particular instance where it's like, wow, that must have been horrible. Yeah, but it also was preceded by, like, I was too trusting. I have
Mhm.
to recognize that. I had the trust. I was absolutely trusting towards this person. And there had been multiple occasions where it's like, if I had been willing to see my life without this person, the idea of being married was far, far, far too important to me because of the traumatic backstory that I possess. I put too much weight on it and not enough weight on the quality of the relationship. And I
Sure.
see that in people over and over again. So if you want to have healthy relationships going forward, no matter what age you are, no matter what stage you are in the relationships that you are having, stop and honestly look at yourself with compassion and without judgment. And that's it's forgiveness of others is not sometimes as difficult as forgiveness of self. Look at yourself as an understandable product of whatever you were, whatever birthed you, influenced you.
Mhm.
Understand that part. Look at the mistakes that you have made. An inability to find happiness as a single person is the one that I see most often. And please don't blame yourself for that if that is something that you have also suffered by. Our entire society programs, particularly people who identify as a woman, to believe that they are judged as having less worth in the eyes of society unless they are paired up because it
Mhm.
means they are not wanted. And not being wanted in our society is supposed to carry some kind of stigma with it. If a dude doesn't want you, or do you really even exist? Yes, you do. Actually, you do not need that validation, that approbation, that approval. You don't need it. You can have a
Mhm.
full and happy life entirely by yourself. And that means if you believe that, that's not the same thing as saying, so I will remain single. The reason that people need to understand that as our default setting is actually being by ourselves and solving our own problems. So, because we always need to be able to fall back on that so that we can leave difficult or toxic relationships. So it is a building block that you want to put into your self structure or your self worth, is your ability to rely on self through all manner of circumstances. You need to be able to emotionally comfort yourself. You need to be able to have a strong idea of what you would do to take care of and support yourself. And this goes for men or women. And I know that there are financial challenges in this world, but you need to understand that I have to build the confidence in myself that I know that I would figure out what to do. If it means I'm renting a room in somebody else's house, I can do it, but I would be able to figure it out. It does
Right.
not need to be the life that you're living, but it needs to be your fallback plan. Have a very good idea of what your life looks like in a thriving capacity by yourself in
Mhm.
order to take down most of the red, because you won't ignore stuff if you're not over investing in the idea of romantic love.
This is true. This is true. Like, I mean, I had so many people tell me, like, along the way, good friends of mine being like trying to show me these things and point them out to me. And I was just like, blah, blah, blah. You don't, I did that whole, you don't know what we're like when we're, when we're alone, stupid thing. And then, but also, like, the thought of being by myself was absolutely terrifying. Like, I had never been by myself before. I didn't know how to, do any, I mean, I knew how to do it, obviously. But like I never had to, and I was not looking forward to that prospect. So yeah, it was very hard to walk away from.
One of the things that you need to also understand is if you fear being by yourself, examine why that is. Now, I
Mhm.
spent so much time alone as a child. I lived in an 8-bedroom house that had almost no furniture in it. So it was like extra special creepy. And I was only in there with my alcoholic grandmother who was like down on one level, and I was always all over the house. I spent all of my time literally alone. So I'm very good at being happy by myself. I'm a self-entertaining unit. But the reason that
Mhm.
people sometimes fear being alone is that if they have emotional or traumatic damage, sometimes there is a part of them, even on a subconscious level, that believes that it was because of someone that they're not likable, and it was secretly my fault. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things to heal in your interior wounds, to be able to make sure that you have relationships because they're fun, because you like another person, because you've fallen in love, but not because you need them to provide a pillar or a foundation within your own self-image or security. And that's my, like, when I'm looking at myself, what red flags did I throw off? That was a big one. That was a big one.
Mhm.
Even though I had never seen a healthy marriage, and I literally never had. I have no aunts, nor uncles, nor cousins that I ever interacted with. I have second and great uncles in it, but they lived far away. So I literally was not surrounded by anything that told me about relationships other than media depictions. So I was kind of raised by Star Trek and like reruns on, early cable TV. And if that was now, I'd probably be a serial killer or God knows what else. But it worked out for the time period because it was all very moralistic and fairly, like, I watched a lot of war movies. So like I'm always invested in the good guys. It did some good things. It did some good things, but it did not provide me with a strong understanding of what relationships were meant to be. That's the other area to look within to make sure you're not ignoring exterior flags. Now, here's the big one. It's going to be a little bit controversial. And like when I tell clients this, they kind of look at me like, are you serious? I'm dead serious. When you meet somebody new through a dating app or through any other means, there are services all over the internet that will perform a cursory background check for about $13 to $15. And it will tell you whether or not the basics of what a person has told you is true. Now, here's the thing. If you find something that doesn't track and it's very obvious, it's like, he told me he's never been married and there are 3 women there who like, that's a big one. Turn around, run away. You don't even like block the person. They are up to something. Now,
Mhm.
that is to get rid of the biggest and the most extreme ones. Remember, there can be gaps. Like, you once looked me up and couldn't find something having to do with my son because my son is from my first marriage. I've been married twice. And so
Yeah.
yeah, and like it caused some confusion on that, and it's like, no, that's my son. My son is my ex-husband's stepson. And it's like, oh, all right. So remember, you can encounter something where it's worth it to approach the person and be
Yes.
like,
Oh,
what's this?
yes. You
It's
don't
like,
always
oh,
have to
you
take
missed a step. There's an entire other husband who
it.
went on to marry and have 3 kids, and that man is with his soulmate. They are still together today. It all worked out for absolutely everybody. And my son got a robust extended family from it. So he has siblings with his father's family as well. So that's not the silver bullet to take it all out, but it gives you a firm idea of what you need to be looking into and what you need to be on the lookout for. Because it doesn't mean block the crap out of somebody unless it's something dire. Look at that criminal history. Or it can simply be, this is something I need to be aware of. And it's not creepy to do it. You do have a right to protect yourself from other people. You genuinely do. And it is such a cursory background check. It is not an invasion of privacy. It's literally just a matter of public record.
Mhm.
And it is something that would save people a world of pain and grief, because the number of people who have come to me, and it is almost always women, but not always. Like there's that little like 2% that it's like, yeah, no, it happens to dudes too. But it happens to cisgender women at a much higher rate, where they find out the person has a family in another state, that they are in fact actually really married. There's a bunch of things that you can find out through that will save you heartache, pain, and toil. Do it before you're emotionally invested. It will help protect you. If you find something that's a little bit like, what's that? Feel free to ask the person and make sure that their answer tracks with that. Being self-protective, and people don't like any of this because it's not romantic. It doesn't fit with a rom-com script. It is so much better to be practical at the start of a relationship than utterly heartbroken at the end of it.
Sure.
And that's the reason to do it. So now we've been talking about cisgender relationships. Any red flag stuff for people from the gay community that you can think of?
No, it's just, and I know I understand that all this exists, and it's still wild to hear it spoken out loud, because it's just, those are things that I don't necessarily ever think about. Like I have some female friends, like we have this thing in Arkansas called Court Connect, so you can look up. It's all a matter of public record of people's arrest history, blah blah blah. And I know a lot of them use that as like their first barometer, right? It's just like I forgot about that, so you just brought it up about doing background checks and stuff. But like I've never even thought about doing that with anyone I've met. I don't
I'm
think
going to be honest. I haven't
people that
either. It's
do.
just
Yeah. And I don't know, like obviously, like people that I meet have just as many secrets or whatever, but I don't know. It's just not something I think about. Now, granted, I have to recognize my privilege here. I'm a 6'4", 300 something pound man, so like I don't have to worry about as many things, I suppose. But I don't know. It's just it's not something that I've had to encounter yet, so it's hard for me to have too many thoughts on it.
One of the things that I see, and I do see it because I read for the LGBTQ plus community constantly, because I'm very, gender affirming and like all of the other things that I believe sexuality is on a fluid scale. And I believe that our approach to gender is something that is largely societally programmed. And so I read for people from all walks of life and treat all relationships as being equal, but they do have different things that characterize them. And the thing to remember that crosses all forms of whatever you are attracted to, whomever you are attracted to, is the fact that if you are in a need-based place on a relationship, it makes you automatically more likely to attract a predator. Because
Hmm.
people working from a need-based place, which is that codependent thing that we're talking about, they can't thrive in an independent or a single capacity. Be aware, if you're coming from that space, it is far more likely that you will ignore red flags and that you will explain away things. Now, here's the thing, we can get carried away with this. When I'm saying do a cursory background check, that is all I am recommending. I'm not
Hmm.
recommending that you stalk the living crap out of people you have just met. Just feel free to, go ahead and fact check them and make sure that it lines up. And one of the things that I have seen happen over and over again in people from the hetero community and people from the gay community is something having to do with smoking. And it's a big one, and people try not to treat it as a big one. If you have stated that you only want to date non-smokers and somebody has represented themselves as a non-smoker, and I am a former smoker, I haven't smoked in a really, really long time, but I did used to smoke. If somebody says they are not a smoker and they show up and they tell you, I'm trying to quit, that is one of the biggest red flags there is, because they're
Really?
trying to override your actual boundaries right there and right then.
Hmm.
It never turns out well. And it's not about shaming smokers, it's telling you about whether or not that person is being authentic with themselves as much as with you. Remember that one because it's super, super important. Some people are not lying their butts off. Sometimes they really are trying to quit smoking, but they haven't conquered it yet. Here's the thing, when someone is trying to do something that means it's not done yet, probably set it aside if it's super important to you. Now, if it really doesn't matter to you, then probably don't just mark, I only want non-smokers. Like if you're really willing to accept somebody who's trying to quit, quote unquote. And the reason I say trying to quit is every single person I know, it's like, yeah, they never quit smoking. Like they like this person like used to get up in the middle of the night and go outside to have a cigarette, that level of addicted to cigarettes. It hardly ever works out. But sometimes it really indicates instead of the person being deceptive or being a predator, they have work to do and they have not confronted the things that they need to yet. And that is somebody who, until we have really healed ourselves and become whole and integrated within, and this is going towards the spiritual concepts, that means that our relationships are usually karmic, trying to teach us lessons about what we are looking for in ourselves and in others. So don't ignore something that, because it seems like not that big a deal. It's like, oh, overall nice person, blah, blah, blah. It's like they also lied to you from jump. Maybe don't ignore that.
Hmm.
Now, there are things that are less important, like somebody who's chronically late. They're always 15 minutes late. Is that something you can live with in a person? Usually. You learn to work around it. You learn because that's not about disrespect. That's about executive functioning, which executive functioning is something that is also, we learn it during childhood. And some people don't have strong executive functioning skills, but it doesn't mean that they're a toxic waste spill in terms of relationships. So again, going back to you, anything you have to add on the idea of red flags you need to examine in yourself or in other people?
I mean, I like that cigarette analogy a lot, actually. Just because, like, it does seem like, especially in the beginning, you have all these like, there's that little game you're playing, right? Like how much am I going to give? Like information am I going to give? Like too soon? Like you don't want to give too much too soon, or like
How we
because
wish you'd seen. Yeah.
certain conversations that need to happen later in the relationship instead of at the beginning. But yeah, I think that's a good point to watch out for those little things up front because it's like, okay, well, if the little things are starting to pile up, then when the big things start to drop later, got to be able to believe those stories. So
The other thing to the other thing is when somebody, the thing that I've seen very frequently, and I've seen it like 6 different times. So if you're a person, you're like, hey, that's me. It's like, no, it's actually something I encounter all the time. Is meeting somebody at a later stage in life, and not necessarily late in life, but a later stage in life, so that everybody has had time to go through a first primary relationship, meaning they've divorced or they've broken up. If the person represents that they filed for divorce and you look up those records and they are in fact the respondent and not the petitioner, that's another one because it's
mhm.
not about them being a liar, liar, pants on fire. Oh my God, they're going to take your grandma's jewels and you'll never see your home again. It is more that they are not being honest with themselves about where their past relationships ended or went wrong. And so there are proceed with caution red flags. That's a proceed with caution red flag. Somebody being late is a proceed with caution red flag. Somebody who is like very on top of like, are you texting back immediately and gets upset with you if they don't text back immediately as a giant red flag for somebody being controlling.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
these
yeah, that's it. Oh, yeah.
these are all tiptoe forward with your 2020 spy glasses on to make sure that it's like, okay, I'm on alert here. This might be nothing, or it might be something really, really effing scary because they could be insecure or they might be an abuser or they
Hmm.
could be both. And so you do have to go forward with you just have to be aware. And the thing is, it's difficult because that is the antithesis of falling head over heels in love is you have to stay grounded. You have to stay grounded to stay safe. And it does not actually kill passion or joy or connection. It keeps it healthier because you're not pretending it's something it isn't so that you can live out a story in your head. And
Yeah.
that's what I find with a lot of trauma victims is that they excuse away behaviors or they explain away things, not through things that they were told, but what they imagine is the person's reasoning, incentive, or underlying issue for doing something.
Hmm.
Please don't do that. It never works out well for people. If you have to assume, oh, he didn't text me, like he was gone for a week. I didn't hear from you, left me on red for a week, and then comes back to you and like tells you this big long story. It's like, but also I felt ignored for a week and I'm not good with that either. Like, please don't just imagine that it's because they have, oh, this demanding baby mama, or their toxic mom takes up all of their time, or do not assume facts that are not in evidence. Okay. Be a
Right.
little bit of a PI in your own life. And if you've had disappointing or difficult relationships, understand, particularly early relationships, were the idea that we overinvest in the idea of permanence is a difficult one, because the relationships you have between the age of 20 and 30 are all about learning who you are in relationships, what you need to improve, what they need to improve, what you're looking for, what you're not looking for, and also confronting the like, well, look at that gaping wound in my psyche from my childhood. I think
Hmm.
you need to close up and heal in order to have a healthy relationships. So
Hmm.
it usually is not the best idea to look towards a long-term commitment before the age of 25, because again, your brain has not even finished forming in impulse control before the age of 25, meaning your body is all like, I'm an adult. Your psyche may be like, I'm an adult. And your brain is like, I'm still doing things.
Yeah.
And it does not actually have good results if you ignore that part. Now, that's the part where people get very, very upset and almost angry at the how dare you of it. Listen, do what you're, nobody's saying you can't. They're just saying, please be aware that these are some of the elements that go into the formation of self. And formation of self that has not been completed is one of the most destructive elements within relationships, because we
Hmm.
form these bonds with these people who, like you with your ex-husband and me with my ex-husband, I had never been safe in my entire life, ever, ever. And so this person made me feel financially safe, and I excused all manner of crap because of it. I had
Hmm.
overinvested in the idea of I needed to be made safe rather than I need to figure out how to make me safe.
Right.
And that's the thing that our early relationships are usually about. So please don't rush towards a long term commitment. We change so much over the course of our lives. Hey, do
Mhm.
you feel like you're a different person at 22 than you are at 32?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. Like, I mean, I see. I got married. How old? I think I was 20. It was 2016. I was in my late 20s when I got married, right? And I had a mentor in the past. He was like, "No one should get married before the age of 30." And of course, I was like, "Well, I did." But then I had to be
Me
like,
too. It
"Oh,
didn't work
wait,
out well
maybe,
twice.
maybe you were right." And I, like most people having the hubris of youth, I was like, "All right, old man, like whatever. Like you're just gonna say that." Kind of blew it off just like every other piece of good advice I ever got.
Yeah.
Uh, but now I'm kind of like I'm on board with this idea. Like you can have the relationships or whatever, but like signing up for that lifelong commitment as we perceive marriage is like why do that before you're 30? Because we have this like weird, I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but like especially in the gay community, it's like once you hit 30, like everything's over, blah blah blah. And I'm like, but my life didn't even really start until I was 30. And it's like I'm actually looking forward to the next decade too. Maybe I'll actually have the money to do the things I want to do. And like, it's like it just things get progressively better. And like, yeah, long-term relationships before 30 is like, what are you doing? Like
You're a work in progress before 30, and that is not to like poo-poo or dismiss or be reductive towards people who are
sure.
like, "Hey, I've been with my person since I was 16 years old. We've been together 40 years."
And some people can do that. Some people can, exactly. And I love that journey for you guys. And I honestly do, but I just don't think that the majority of people have the ability to grow together, grow as individuals in a relationship that way. I certainly didn't. I don't think most people do. And so if you are in a relationship that started in high school and you're still married and everything's great, I love that. I'm so happy you guys were able to have that growth together. But like, I just don't think that that's the common story, right? You're the exception of.
Understand that's a rarity. That is a rarity rather than the overall general experience, because like the half of marriages end in divorce. And it may be more than that at this particular point. And again, it is really It's not that it's foolish, it's just that it's not likely to work out. If you try and form a relationship with somebody before you have finished forming, then again, like what happened and like I've had all kinds of relationships. I, honest to goodness, did not take marriage very seriously, having been around terrible marriages. By the time I married my longest partner, which was close to 20 years, I was really committed to the idea of like honoring all vows and making sure I was like,
Hmm.
I wouldn't do this again unless I was 100% positive I was going to be in it, be in it, be in it, be in it, be in it. And so
Hmm.
here's what I did is that I would not give myself an exit strategy when things started to go wrong as well, partially because of that. Please don't invest your identity in an exterior relationship because it gives that exterior relationship or structure or power the too much sway over you, too much control over you. First, know who you are and then form your relationships from that place of self knowledge and authenticity, and hopefully from a healed base. And by the way, do you need to be perfectly healed to have relationships? Good God, no. Like we're
Right.
like some of us are going to be healing for the rest of our darn lives. I'm always talking
Hmm.
about how I'm dealing with my darn patients all the time, which it gets better every single day. But it's only been within the last year that I finally found out something very important. Something really scary happened with my dog. Really scary, scared the living crap out of me. And I was absolutely fine to her. I was very sympathetic. I was very compassionate. And afterwards, as I was going to do some grounding, I had this giant surge of anger. Just giant. I mean, like my car is probably the rage mobile because it's the only place that I ever let out any anger because it's the only place that's fair to everybody. My neighbors won't be impacted. My dogs won't be impacted. My friends won't be impacted. I only like I'll be driving down the street in my little Infinity, yodeling my brains out with rage sometimes just to get it out, but it finally allowed me to make the connection. Why do you get it's usually because you're feeling threatened or frightened.
Hmm.
That was a key piece of self-knowledge in taking out something that cannot be in healthy relationships. You can get angry, but expressing it has to be within healthy parameters and boundaries. And a lot of these red flag things do have to do with the formation of healthy boundaries. And you and I will talk about like that very specifically at some point, if you're willing to, you patient and good soul, because it's information that people need to be discussing. But when it comes to red flags, look to yourself first because that's the thing you have the most control over, and then apply the external ones to keep yourself safe. And I beg of you to hear me on this. Do not let yourself get swept off of your feet and abandon all caution because sometimes it will work out, but it's not that often.
Hmm.
Usually it's called marrying in haste and repenting at leisure, but it doesn't need to involve marriage. It can be committing. Please don't overcommit to new relationship. It's one of the hallmarks of codependency. I've said this before, I will likely say it again. Nothing makes me steal for impact more than when a client comes in all aglow and they met somebody 6 weeks ago and they think they've met their person. And it's like, oh, I hope this goes well. I hope this, as I'm putting down the cards. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, but it would be much better if they walked in with the measured, like, we have a lot in common. I'm really hoping this is my person, but I'm not sure yet. Please don't be sure until you've put in the time because people reveal themselves over time.
Hmm.
And the cracks will show in whatever facade they are putting forth. And sometimes it is a facade born not of duplicity nor any evil behind it, but rather in their own insecurities. Like in the example of somebody who's trying to quit smoking, but it makes them feel bad about themselves because so many people check off no smokers on dating apps. And like, could I date somebody who smoked? No, I could not. I couldn't. Like, it really, like a lot of ex-smokers, and it's been so. Like, I never crave cigarettes, by the way. Like, I was talking to somebody who quit more than 10 years ago. Again, she's like, I think about it every day, and I'm like, really? I think I would projectile vomit if I had to try and smoke a cigarette
Hmm.
right now, because it's like it just is not appealing to me. I'm very fortunate in that. But there are things that if somebody is trying to get around your standards, it either indicates they have a problem with themselves or they're not going to be respectful of boundaries that you put in place because they already weren't.
Right.
And it can be difficult because finding connection in a lonely world is very, very challenging. And so here's the solution for that: stop looking for your connection solely in romance. Join classes, join interest groups, join hiking groups, take photography classes, painting classes, form friendships, have book clubs. Y'all, you can't look to a romance to fulfill all of your social needs because it sets you up for, and it's lovely to be married to your best friend. Make sure you have a secondary best friend that you can complain about that person to. It's important. It's important to not put all of your emotional needs into one basket. Diversify your interests, diversify your connections. Surface level acquaintances are valuable as well. It doesn't just need to be people that you have this kismet with, this kind of karmic energy where it's like it's like our souls have known each other or something. That doesn't have to be all your friendships. Some of them are just fun and chatty friendships, but it gives you that support network of, I have a life outside of this relationship, so I will never jeopardize my life for this relationship.
Yeah.
That's why paying attention to red flags is so, so very important. So I'm trying to think through if we've had good actionable advice around how to proceed. I think so. Do you have anything to add, Jacob?
No, I mean, to be completely honest, this was meant to be a learning experience for me as well. Like, because again, like you have a perspective that I don't really have, and like, yeah, just pay attention to the little things up front. I mean, that's really good advice. That's advice I give. I would have liked to have been given. I'm sure my husband would have as well, because there were definitely things along the road that we could have worked on earlier. I don't know, but yeah, here we are.
Here's the thing, dude. Like and you're a good sport about this, and we did joke about calling this series about relationships. We fucked up so you don't have to. In this instance, it's I fucked up so that you don't have to. Oh my God, was I ever bad at relationships in my early stages? Like, and I have to let myself off the hook for it. I never meant to hurt anybody. Anybody ever hurt? I'm so very sorry. Like, I genuinely am. And I'm never as bad as it sounds when I start talking about that. But it's an area that I look back at and I'm like, I was like a car crash in slow motion. Oh, look, there's victim and there's victim. Like everybody else suffered from my bad childhood, including me. But I never meant to take anybody out with me, and I never really did. But I have a hard time looking back, so I look back for the lessons. And part of the reason I'm so willing to expose the not great parts of my character is so that people can know, A, you are not alone if you have struggled coming from a difficult set of circumstances that include any type of abuse or bullying or neglect, which is one of the most potent forms of abuse as well, and leads to codependency in a great many people because they are looking for somebody to take care of them. Please look back at yourself honestly and kindly. You do not need to hide from the things you need to heal. If you hide from them, the chances that you heal them are almost nil. And here's the thing, the more you heal, the better your friendships, the better your relationships, the better your romances. And healthy romance may not be the stuff of Wuthering Heights, but let's face it, those guys were jackasses.
Right.
If you've ever read Wuthering Heights, it's like, oh my, you deserve each other. Eek. One of the characters marries someone to drive them insane because they're so upset that they can't be with their true love. And it's like, why don't you take that guy, Heathcliff? He is a toxic waste dump. And so is Catherine. Heathcliff, Keith, and Catherine, it is sold to us as a great romance. But if you look at it from a healthy standpoint, it's like, those are the most toxic people I've ever seen in my life. And was it their fault? No. There were a lot of things that went into that. Please look at yourself the exact same way. If you have had toxic relationship dynamics, if you have struggled, please look at yourself not to blame nor shame, but to heal and embrace so that you, when you're going forward, you're planting green flags and attracting them in, and green flags, people who do what they say they're going to do, people who show up when they say they're going to, people who are honest about having made mistakes. If you meet somebody and they are fresh out of a relationship and it's all the other person's fault, red flag, because everybody is always participating in their relationships. And it can include, it's like, whenever I hear somebody and they were just because did my ex suffer from some of my stuff too? Oh my God, yes. He really genuinely did. At first, I fell into an I had agoraphobia. I couldn't leave the house for like 2 years because the first time I was ever safe, I was like, I am never leaving here. Now, those are all things I fought against and healed. But those are the things that I look at to be like, well, what do you need to be to make sure you have different results if you decide to have relationships going forward? And it is for me being self-reliant, self-sufficient, and independent on every level, including being able to understand and take care of my emotions, because the thing that he eventually was doing was he was triggering me on purpose over and over again, and it made me weaker and weaker and sicker and sicker. And was that partially my fault? Yeah, it was partially my fault because I was staying in the relationship for reasons that were not about really loving that person, but rather maintaining a long-term relationship because I thought it was important.
Yeah.
Examine yourself kindly in order to have better outcomes and to turn your red flags to green. All right, so that was this, and like sooner or later, like people are gonna be screaming and yelling at me in comment sections. Listen, I'm never trying to hurt anyone. I am trying to help people. And here's the thing, if you are not having the relationships that you want, stop being angry about it and really, as calmly as you can, say, well, what went into it? What am I
Mhm.
doing? What have I overlooked? What do I need to change? What do I need to heal? And you will end up happier. And if you're happier with yourself, you don't put too much weight on exterior relationships. You have them because they're delightful, not because you need them. Okay. So that was today's episode. Jacob, you're still available at Southern Style Readings on Facebook.com. There's a link that will connect you in the description box on all of these episodes. And you can be reached at southernstylereadings@gmail.com. I'm Alane.
Correct.
You can find me at therisingmoon.com if you want to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. You can do that there. It's the only way to book me. If anyone ever approaches you, and this goes for Jacob too, if anyone ever approaches you on any social media platform claiming to be a tarot card reader, you know it's not them, guys. The real readers don't do that. We don't do that. You have to come to us, not the other way around. That is one of the hallmarks of a scam artist. So be aware, and it is usually that somebody has cloned their account and is masquerading as them as well. And you can also find me on my YouTube channel, Cronecast at the Rising Moon. And then, of course, you can find us here at Logical Magic, examining esoterica. Hey, Jacob, thank you so much for being your authentic self over and over again and being willing to show the world your boo-boos, just like I do, being like, yes, these are my wounds. This is how I healed them. Learn from me so that you can do better. Take care and be well, everybody. Live magically.